Welcome to the Ricci Flow Nutrition podcast. My name is Cameron Borg. On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Raisel Reyter. Raisel Reyter is a professor of cell biology in the Department of Cell Systems and Anatomy at UT Health San Antonio, Texas. His research is centered around the impact of melatonin in biological systems. He is the editor-in-chief of Melatonin Research and on the editorial board of over 35 other journals. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including 3 honorary Doctor of Medicine degrees and the Presidential Distinguished Scholar Award from UT Health San Antonio. He is also on the Clarivate Analytics list of highly cited scientists. At the time of recording, Professor Reyter's papers have been cited over 174,000 times. Raisel is the world's leading expert on the topic of melatonin. His contributions to this field are unparalleled, and the work of him and his colleagues has shaped and will continue to shape the domains of research including cancer, artificial light, sleep, neurodegenerative disease, circadian rhythms, and much, much more. Raisel is one of my scientific heroes. His publications are thought-provoking, insightful, and most importantly, I feel they help people understand the importance of light-dark cycles and how they can live in a way that helps them age without the burden of disease. Raisel is an inspiration and someone I certainly look up to. He's incredibly humble and has a great sense of humor, which I think is a wonderful quality to have as a researcher. As he pointed out to me during our conversation, he's been studying melatonin since before my mother was even born, so he's really been walking the walk for a really long time. In our conversation, we also delved into using supplemental melatonin, particularly as we get older. I just wanted to make sure it's understood that the information in this podcast is not medical advice. Raisel and I had a great time talking about his research that he's been involved in over the years and the ideas that he holds as a result of this research, but make sure you speak with your doctor before blindly using any supplements. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, how's things over in Texas?
Very well, thank you. We seem to have gotten by COVID and all is well. How about in Australia? You still have COVID?
It's lingering around, but I think most people are just pushing through now and looking forward to getting back to normalcy.
What city are you in?
I'm in Sydney, so just about an hour out of the city. Yeah.
Yeah. I visited Australia several times, so I know where things are generally. I haven't been to Ayers Rock. It's one place I want to go. I haven't been to Perth.
I can definitely recommend Ayers Rock. It's
really
it's phenomenal.
It's moving.
It's the gravity of the place is unlike anything else.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah. So how did you get into studying melatonin? Because it's such a fascinating topic to me, and you are the guy.
Well, if you're really interested, I'll tell you. I received my PhD degree in 1964. I had a military obligation, so I spent 2 years as a captain in the United States service. But since I was a PhD, I was assigned to Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, which was the Army Chemical Center. That was 7 years, that was 1964, 7 years after Sputnik. You know what Sputnik was? And the United States was already discussing the likelihood that we were behind the Russians and that we have to send a person to Mars soon, already in 1964. But they envisioned, at the time we had was a 2 or a 3 man small capsule. And they said, well, these astronauts, since it's going to take them 6 months to get there, they're going to be bored out of their mind in that little bitty capsule, and there's going to have to be a lot of resources, including food and water. So what we have to do is get the astronauts to hibernate. So they charged me and 2 other civilian scientists, I was a military, there were 2 civilian scientists, the job of isolating the factor that causes hibernation in animals with the intent of using it on astronauts. Well, melatonin had also just been discovered 6 years previously, and we started looking at hibernators and looking at drugs that may impact them. And one thing we jumped upon was melatonin. Melatonin is not the hibernating factor, but it has some features in terms of temperature regulation and so forth that suggest it could be usable. So since then, Friday, 1964, I don't know the date. I recall the day I made the decision mentally that this is my research, melatonin. Nothing was known at the time, of course. It was 6 years after discovery. So I was really in on the ground floor, but it was U.S. space program that enticed me. And ironically, now, of course, all astronauts use melatonin to regulate their sleep-wake cycle and adjust their circadian rhythm. So it's come full circle.
That's an incredible story. I didn't know your backstory, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense now that you mention it. So I guess at that time there was no real distinction between pineal melatonin and cellular melatonin. We hadn't discovered that at the time. So,
not at all. No, the only thing we knew is that the pineal gland was the source of this molecule. And the only reason we knew that is when we surgically removed the pineal gland, melatonin was no longer present, that at least in the blood that we could measure. Yeah. And that's it. Believe me, that's the only thing we could measure. And the assay that we used was extremely crude. There was not even radioimmunoassay yet. We used a bioassay, and the bioassay used a fish called a pencil fish that has a black line down its side that's responsive. The pigment is responsive to melatonin. So if you put some melatonin in water and they take the melatonin in, that line shrinks and you measure it and you get some very, very, very crude estimate of melatonin. Like I say, times are very, very different. Now, everything at a moment's notice, we can have the answer, but back then, pretty primitive.
Yeah, things have progressed a long way. So
I presume, Cameron, I presume you, because you're a nutritionist, you are interested in the plant levels of melatonin.
Yeah, so I mean, we can jump into it now. I was going to ask you about...
I just want to make sure you knew that. So you go ahead with your questions. And
all right. Well, I wanted to sort of highlight the difference between pineal melatonin, the stuff that you would find in the serum, versus the melatonin that's made in the cells, every minute of every day.
Yeah. Well, melatonin, of course, is melatonin. Melatonin in the pint, melatonin in the skin, melatonin in the liver, melatonin in the plant, what it is. It's the same molecule. The difference is in you, for example, you have a pineal gland, hopefully, and it produces melatonin every night and it released into the blood right now. You turn on a light early this morning, that suppressed your melatonin down to daytime levels. But in these cells, all the other cells that produce melatonin do not release it into the blood. In other words, if I remove your pineal gland, I probably won't do that while you're on air. But anyway, if I do that, your blood levels of melatonin will essentially go to zero, but your cells will still be producing. So there's what we call a releasable pool of melatonin from the pineal gland and a non-releasable pool of melatonin from other cells. But in both cases, in both the pineal and in the cells, as you age, melatonin levels drop very, very significantly. And we think this is part and parcel of aging and of age-related diseases.
Yeah, that's it's a very precipitous drop as far as I can tell. Once you get past about 40, I think it drops quite a lot.
It's a gradual reduction. Some people actually, ironically, if you take people who are 75 years old and classify them as very poor health or good health, there is a difference in their melatonin levels. Those with good health have a relatively preserved melatonin rhythm. Now, the people argue that that's because the melatonin is preserving them from getting old, but that's a guess, because maybe they have better melatonin because they're in better health, not the reverse. So that does not hold. But generally, as you age, in my case, I'm 85 years old. I know, because I can measure it, I would not be producing any melatonin at all, but I still have melatonin.
So what are the main roles of both the different types, the intracellular and the serum types of melatonin? What are their roles?
Well, the serum melatonin levels we feel, and it's also in the cerebrospinal fluid around the brain, and it's actually in higher concentrations in the cerebrospinal fluid than in the blood. And there's a marked rhythm in the cerebrospinal fluid. We think that rhythm is for the purposes of the chronobiotic effects of melatonin, regulating circadian rhythms. I think that's the primary effect of that melatonin. At the cellular level, that melatonin is preserve energy production, scavenge free radicals that are produced in mitochondria, and help the cell to function optimally. Melatonin has a lot of functions at the cellular level, and all of them suggest that melatonin is beneficial for cells. And of course, the fact that you lose it with age could be significant in proving that association is very difficult, because you don't know which came first. Do they lose their melatonin age, or do they age and lose their melatonin? And one thing is almost seems to be relatively firm, is that melatonin delays or prevents the development of certain age-related diseases, particularly brain degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and so forth. And then it may also coincidentally prolong life because it's delaying these diseases. So whether it's a direct effect on aging or indirect because it's influencing diseases, we simply are not sure at this point. But I will say that what are you going to do with this information, Cameron? I don't want you to. What are you going to do with it?
Well, I am going to put it out. So don't say anything incriminating or that unpublished work or anything. You're not going.
Well, no. I think that people beyond the age of 45 should consider supplementing with melatonin every night. That's my considered opinion on the basis of what I know melatonin is capable of doing. You lose it as you age, and its effects are such that we think it will be beneficial to aging. I'll have to say that I've been taking melatonin for 27 years. Like I say, I'm 85 years old. I actually wish I'd have started taking it earlier. I didn't start until I was 57. That's not a recommendation. I don't want you to say, well, Reyter says everybody should take melatonin. That's your choice.
Yeah.
All I'm telling you is what I know and experience, and melatonin is a very wholesome molecule.
Well, you have a particular interest in the role of melatonin in cancer development and metastases. If I'm
very much so.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what role melatonin plays in cancer development and progression?
Yeah, that's very important. Melatonin inhibits the DNA damage that initiates a cancer. It slows down the proliferation of cancer, but we now think that one of the best advantages melatonin has in terms of cancer is preventing metastases. And that is very important by virtue of the fact that typically you do not die of the primary cancer. There are some exceptions, but for example, if you have a black mole on your face, very, very, very deadly cancer, but it doesn't kill you at all. You could have that mole all over your face but it's when it metastasizes. And melatonin's ability to reduce metastasis seems to be very significant. And we only understand part of the mechanism by which it does that, but it prevents the breakdown of, there's a lot of things around cells, extracellular materials and so forth, that the cells have to wiggle through to get to a blood vessel. One of the things melatonin does is does not allow the breakdown of that material. It also, because of the metabolism, it keeps the metabolism of the cell in a state that it is not reducing what is called a lot of lactic acid to make the environment acidic. And that's also very beneficial for preventing the cells from moving somewhere else. Metastasis, like I say, I mean, you don't want any cancer, but what you really want to avoid most of the time is taking up residence somewhere else. So melatonin's effect, again, it's not a recommendation, but, well, obviously I've taken melatonin for many years. I take it for many different reasons. Am I guaranteed that it'll protect me? No guarantees in life. I still may get cancer. I may get metastatic cancer. I may get Alzheimer's disease. But I'm trying to do what I can to defer, forestall, delay any of those debilitating conditions of the aged. That's, but like I say, there are no guarantees, and just if everybody take melatonin doesn't mean everybody benefit from it. People are still going to get some cancer, they're still going to get neurodegeneration, but if you're prone, I think it would be worth an attempt to delay.
From my read of yours, a lot of your papers, and even more broadly than that, two key things you want is a very, very robust circadian rhythm. You want to make sure your light-dark cycles are really tight and regular each day, and you want to keep your mitochondria really healthy throughout life as much as possible. So what in our environment today is really damaging the way that those two factors help to deploy melatonin in a way that's going to be beneficial?
Firstly, what you just summarized is absolutely key. Strong circadian rhythms, good mitochondrial health. Well, the problem with current societies is, one of the problems is the misuse of artificial light. Humans evolved over a period of 3 to 4 million years, and the light-dark cycle was determined by the rising and the setting of the sun. Now, I'm sure right now I guess it's light in your home. I see out a window there where it's light. But you may have gotten up this morning, it was dark, and you turned on a light, of course, any light at night immediately. And you have to understand that 1/4 to 1/3 of all the working people in the world work at night. People generally misuse light. In Australia, you're a well-developed country. When the sun goes down in the afternoon, you don't go right to bed. You just don't do it. And as a consequence, what we are doing is truncating, having a shorter melatonin increase, because on average, people, again, in well-developed countries, rarely sleep more than 8 hours, and often sometimes only 6. And that's the only time typically people are in darkness. Even though the night length may be 12 hours. On March 21st of this year, it was 12/12. It was equinox. But I bet there wasn't a person in Australia that slept 12 hours that night. Or in America, or maybe in Central Africa or somebody, yes. But this is the biggest hindrance, I think. And of course, the other thing is medications. A lot of medications, which are important for health also. They can prevent hypertension or whatever, but they also impact either the circadian rhythms or melatonin production. So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place. I mean, these medications are important, but also they have obviously severe side effects, or they wouldn't be prescription medications. They're prescription for a reason. They don't want you to use them unless it's absolutely necessary. So misuse of light is rampant, obviously, and especially, you probably know, is blue wavelengths of light. And now, maybe in Australia also, there's this switch to light-emitting diodes, and they're very blue-rich. And as a consequence, they will likely have greater effect on the melatonin rhythm. Optimally, we would all, be in darkness 10 hours a day and never have any light. I always remind people, especially my age, obviously when you get older, males have to get up at night usually to relieve themselves. The important thing is that you don't turn on a light. You should be able to negotiate your home and use the facilities without having to turn on a light. Unless you have to, once you go to bed at night, avoid light until you get up, minimally.
So what impact do you think artificial light is having on the incidence of cancer and neurodegenerative disease and metabolic disease?
Very good question. I think it's significant, but there's a lot of intervening factors. There's diet, and there's pollution, and there's light, and there's, all types of pollutants in the air, like the fires in Australia last summer. I mean, you had a lot of, and that's going to contribute to, over the long run, some malfunction of the lungs, asthma, and so forth and so on. But it's not unique to Australia. We have the similar problems. And China has very serious problems with pollution. So it's tough to make a judgment about cause and effect, specifically how much light. But let me put it this way. It doesn't help. I mean, if you are, I remind people that, for example, there are a lot of working people that are relatively regular in terms of their light-dark cycle. On beginning Sunday to Thursday night, they go to bed at 10 o'clock because they have to work the next day and get up at 6 or 7. But then on the weekend, gentlemen like you who are young say, well, now it's party time. So you're up to 4 in the morning. And there's always this, you are inducing something similar to jet lag. In other words, your circadian cycle is, and then on the weekend, 2 days, you are altering your circadian cycle. So during the week, you are not quite in sync. And again, that may be consequential in terms of our, well, it is consequential in terms of our overall health. I mean, let's face it, we abuse ourselves badly. We really do. But that's the nature of the beast. What are we going to do? It's not likely we're going to shoot out all the lights and clean up all our air and don't use prescription drugs and so forth and so on. So we have to learn the limitations of what we can do and make the best judgment we can.
So, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, we're not going to, remove all the lights from our house and cover and blindfold ourselves as soon as the sun sets. So I was wondering what your opinion on, these red tinted glasses, the blue blocking glasses. Do you think that they might play a role in helping us to preserve our melatonin at night?
Good question, Cameron. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm often asked that, and now they've become relatively popular. Apparently, they're pretty well known also in Australia. The ones you showed, for example, you put them on, but they're not wraparounds. Show me them again. Show them to me again.
They're just a standard.
Yeah, exactly. They're not wraparounds, so still the light's coming in from the side.
Yeah.
But even if it isn't, if you use blue filtering glasses, I don't think it would hurt if every evening at 7 o'clock, particularly if you're going to watch the tube or something, because there's a lot of blue wavelengths of light associated with, and also your computer screen. I don't see any reason you shouldn't wear them, but I don't know how effective they are, because unless you're extremely diligent, you'd probably take them off before you go to bed and have on regular lights, and that would immediately readjust your clock. So you'd have to turn out the lights before it gets unbelievably complex and so forth. But they are used now in some hospital settings also. And in regard to that, I think that's one place that we do a severe injustice to patients. The worst place to be if you're sick is in the hospital. If you're concerned with circadian rhythms and light pollution, so forth. I'm in a medical school building, which is right next to the hospital, and I often go very early. And I look up at the hospital, and at least half the lights in the rooms are on, and they probably have been on most of the night. And it's well known now that individuals in intensive care, for example, do better if they have some kind of a regular light dark thing. Circadian rhythms cannot be underestimated. They are very, very critical. So those glasses are okay. They don't do any harm. And if used properly, they may do some good.
Okay, good. I'm glad I got that. Got your opinion on that. I also wanted to ask, extending beyond the visible wavelengths of light that impact our production of melatonin, I was just wondering if there's any impact of electromagnetic fields, things like Wi-Fi, cell phones, on the functioning of the pineal gland.
That is an interesting proposition. That was big business in the 1990s. Again, you were just probably barely born, but at that time there was a major interest in non-visible, extremely short frequency electromagnetic radiation. I would say in general, they didn't pan out to have major effects on the circadian melatonin rhythm, but that does not mean that these wavelengths, especially when you use a cell phone very close to your head and so forth, that is not influencing synaptic transmission or other important functions of your there are reports that people who use cell phones for X number of hours daily do have some neural cancer and so forth. Again, the connection is very difficult to make because there's so many other factors. But I think it would be prudent not to overuse. In other words, cell phones, again, an item we're never going to get rid of. Most people your age in particular can't live without your device. I carry it, but I can live if I don't have it. But the point is, unless you need it, I think you should not use it. But now texting has become so readily available, nobody even talks on the phone anymore. We're going to lose our voice. The way I figured, in a couple of thousand years, humans won't be able to talk at all. They'll just have long fingers for as we evolve for texting.
That's a science fiction novel right there. You've just got to write it now.
Yeah. I see a group of teenagers sitting around a table, and they're all texting, and they're probably texting the person right across the table from it. So
Now, I wanted to ask you about maybe other sources of melatonin. I know we can supplement, but pistachio nuts seem to have the highest amount of melatonin for a food. Am I correct in that?
Well, that's the report. I know what you're referring to. Generally, I'll tell you that seeds nuts have higher concentrations than other proteins. And the reason for that is interesting. The reason they do is seeds and nuts are generally fatty, and fatty acids are very easily oxidized, destroyed by free radicals. And more importantly than that, the nut or the seed, like your sperm or a woman's oocyte, is the next generation. If that seed is not protected, that will not germinate, and theoretically, that species would become no longer existent. If pistachios have the highest concentration, and certainly the data that has been published, there's only that one report that I know, it makes sense because this plant, the pistachio tree, can survive in the most arid conditions. It can survive in extreme environments. And we know in plants that melatonin, and maybe even in animals, melatonin can be upregulated. If you take a plant, virtually any plant, and now hundreds have been tested, and put them in a stressful environment like a drought or extra heat or cold, what they immediately do is upregulate their melatonin to protect them from that damage. And that, we recently wrote an article, for example, the global warming, if you buy into that, that's, again, opinion that different people have. If global warming is persistent, it is obvious that plants or food crops such as rice, certain strains of rice do not do well even with an average increase of nighttime temperatures by 2 degrees. And we just suggested recently that to overcome that issue, we'll have to start genetically engineering plants to produce more melatonin to protect against that excess heat at night. And I think that's something that will seriously be done. Several plants have already been genetically engineered to increase their melatonin content. There's one strain of microtom tomato. There's a couple of strains of rice, but I think we're going to see more and more of that because melatonin really protects plants from adverse environmental conditions. This has been documented thousands of times. What is interesting about melatonin plants, the discovery of melatonin plants did not come until 1995, which much after, and I don't know if you know this, but it was my lab that discovered melatonin plants. We are animal biologists, but we happen to have I happen to have a couple of postdocs that were playing around with plants, and we discovered we've published 2 papers in 1995. For 10 years, that data was totally overlooked. People say, they're not melatonin plants. Last year, 2021, there were more publications on plant melatonin than there were on animal and human melatonin. This has become a major, major, major field. And I'm still involved in it because I collaborate with a lot of scientists around the world on plant studies. A plant melatonin is making big strides in terms of agricultural applications, and I think it will continue. I think it'll be somewhat of a lifesaver for a lot of plants, because if we can genetically engineer them to produce more melatonin, which we have suggested in several publications, I think we'll be able to save some of the. What seems to be of importance for a lot of plants is the nighttime temperature. Daytime temperatures seem to be somewhat more tolerable, but if it's too warm at night, they seem to falter, and that's and there's where I think plants can really benefit from having more melatonin. But melatonin plants is phenomenal. It influences root growth, it influences flowering, it influences obviously seed development, it influences even the quality of fruits have been shown to be improved taste. There's all kinds of measurements. Fruit people do that, determines the quality of fruits, and melatonin seems to be extremely good at that. So, but it's ironic that an animal biologist, or we discovered melatonin in plants, but it was, like I say, overlooked for 10 years. But now it's really blooming.
So if melatonin's in plants, that means the molecule is likely billions of years old. Is that a correct assumption?
We think, I always put it this way, melatonin is older than dirt. Prokaryotes that evolved about 3.5 billion, in other words, bacteria produce melatonin. And what happened over a billion or so years, then there was the evolution of early eukaryotes, which have a nucleus, and they were eating the bacteria. And they eventually decided, they didn't decide, they didn't have a brain, but what eventually happened is the bacteria that were engulfed for food eventually evolved into the mitochondria. And we think that is why the mitochondria produce the melatonin, because they're precursors. So really, mitochondria are bacteria that are growing in cells. That's how they evolved, about 2.5 billion years ago, plus or minus 10 or 15 million years. When you think about it, 3 billion years ago, that's 3,000 million years ago. That's a long time for melatonin to be around. So it's not surprising that it has a lot of functions. It's learned over a very, very, very long period how to interact with other molecules, how to be preserved, and how to benefit the organisms that they're supporting. Yeah, melatonin, so far as we know, is 2.5 to 3.5 billion, 3,000 million years. Incomprehensible. Even before I was born.
So I'm assuming because it's so old, it's going to be playing some very, very crucial and non-negotiable roles in biology. And it seems, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems as though the transformation of, I think it's tryptophan to serotonin and then goes to melatonin. Is that a very crude?
Would you repeat that, Cameron? A transition?
So tryptophan gets converted to serotonin, and then serotonin gets converted to melatonin. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So
there's a couple of other intervening molecules, but it's from tryptophan. And you cannot make tryptophan. Plants can make their own tryptophan, but we cannot.
Yeah. So in those steps, and there are probably, like you said, there's a few in between those major ones. But what cofactors are you aware of that you need to make that conversion so that you're actually ending up with melatonin?
Well, for example, a conversion of serotonin to N-acetylserotonin, which is then converted to melatonin, that enzyme seems to be determine the amount of melatonin. That is the rate limiting enzyme called N-acetyltransferase, or alkylalamine N-acetyltransferase. A very important cofactor is required for that step, and that is acetyl coenzyme A. Well, acetyl coenzyme A is produced in mitochondria from pyruvate, and cancer cells and many other pathological cells exclude pyruvate from the mitochondria. And we predicted a number of years ago that they would have less melatonin in their mitochondria. And we now know, we have a paper in press showing that that's exactly the case. They only produce about half. Acetyl-CoA can be produced by some other routes, fatty acid oxidation in the mitochondria and so forth, but they don't not produce as much melatonin as we think they should. And since melatonin is an anti-cancer agent, if these cancer cells are not producing melatonin or enough melatonin, that may also contribute to the fact that they grow out of control. So this is one of the, I think that's maybe the key cofactor by virtue of the fact that it is involved with the rate-limiting enzyme in melatonin production. Some of the other enzymes, although there are cofactors involved, they're not to the same degree as acetyl-CoA is for NAT. And like I say, that acetyl-CoA, there's some evidence that it may also be produced in the cytosol, but certainly the bulk of it is in the mitochondria, and that requires pyruvate. If pyruvate's not getting into the mitochondria, obviously you are familiar with Warburg type metabolism. We recently published, well, not recently now, 3 or 4 years ago, published a paper indicating that maybe Warburg type metabolism, was originally thought to be unique to cancer. Now, many, many pathological cells use Warburg metabolism, aerobic glycolysis. And we think that may be part and parcel of many diseases. In other words, the fact that their mitochondria are not producing much melatonin, it's compromising ATP, which is energy, which all normal cells need. And these pathological cells, if you can convert them back to oxidative phosphorylation via the mitochondria, you could reverse some of this pathology. And we know melatonin does some of that. I could explain mechanistically, but it gets very complicated. But I think there's, again, it's related to what I said earlier about disease prevention or disease delaying. I think supplementing with melatonin, beginning at, we don't know when. Ideally, what we do is measure your melatonin levels and decide when you should. But melatonin, melatonin is easy to measure now. The only difficult part of it is getting blood samples in the middle of the night in darkness. In other words, you want to know your nighttime peaks. That's what's important.
Is it saliva that you use?
I'm sorry?
Is it saliva that you use?
Yeah, you can use saliva. Saliva is a little bit less reliable. The amplitude of the rhythm is less. There seems to be somewhat more variable, but that doesn't mean I'm not in favor of it. Mm-hmm. It's easier than collecting blood samples. There's cotton placettes you can put in your mouth, then centrifuge them and collect them during the night. So, there's saliva. But melatonin is every bodily fluid. If you want to blow your nose in the middle of the night, they'll see some melatonin there. If you're crying regularly, you collect those tears, melatonin in there. And there's even some evidence that it's in sweat. There's a scientist in Arizona, in the United States here, that is looking at melatonin in sweat. So melatonin seems to be ubiquitous. Every organism, plant and animal, seems to have that good old molecule melatonin.
So I've heard a lot that the red and near infrared and even the infrared wavelengths help to produce melatonin, or they have some sort of effect on production and release of melatonin. Is that true?
Cameron, I have to ask you, how long have you been studying melatonin? You are really up to snuff. There's a lot of...
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it, and I've read a lot of your papers, and I've read a lot of books, and I've spoken to some very, very learned people like yourself. I'm fascinated by
it. Scott Zimmerman, who's a lighting engineer. I know him very well, obviously.
I've got your paper just there.
I see. That paper, again, was one of those papers that didn't initially attract a lot of interest. Within the last year, however, a number of groups have become very fascinated by these. The implication is that infrared radiation, which penetrates several centimeters through the skin, has an immediate impact on locally produced melatonin. So again, the experimental evidence is not compelling in the sense that there have not been a lot of studies. It would be nice to expose an individual to, or a group of individuals to infrared radiation, which you get on a sunny day, and then take biopsies of the skin and measure the melatonin and so forth. Those studies have not been done yet, but I think, again, because of how long melatonin has been around, and that people evolved under natural conditions where now people hardly get any infrared radiation anymore. We're all indoor people. But we evolved from creatures that were living 100% outdoors, and during the day they got a lot of infrared. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is in fact a significant factor in regulating local. It doesn't impact pineal, but local, and protects you from ultraviolet and everything else. Melatonin is a very, very protective molecule. I'm working with some skin, you probably know the name Slominski, Angie Slominski. He and I published a lot of papers on skin melatonin production. But at any rate, again, I don't want you sending out a message saying Reyter believes melatonin does everything. Reyter thinks it's a miracle molecule. No, it's just a very good, wholesome molecule that knows what it's doing. And it does it to the best of its ability, and everyone seems to benefit. Plants, animals, humans.
Yeah. How are we going for time, Russ?
We have a few more minutes.
I'd love to ask you about using melatonin as a supplement. I don't use it personally, but there seems to be some differing opinions. Some people I've heard, Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford thinks that melatonin supplementation is generally not a very good idea. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on the use of supplemental melatonin, particularly in an aging population?
In an aging facility?
In an aging population, just in general, yeah.
It's my personal opinion that would be a very good idea, in the sense that aging is associated with a lot of sickness and disease. I'll give you an example. Alzheimer's disease costs the economy of the United States about $250 billion, not million, billion dollars a year in healthcare. Imagine if we could delay that, the onset or the severity of that disease, by 2 years. That'd be $500 billion. And there are many, many, many diseases that are very expensive, and most of them are in the elderly. And if we can delay these diseases, first of all, you improve the quality of life of the individuals. If you can prevent the disease, reduce their duration of sickness, and they may actually die of old age. I always talk about that. When I die, I want to die of old age. And they say, well, what did he die from? He died of nothing. What do you mean he died of nothing? He just died right there. See, on the floor he is. He's dead, but he has nothing. Yeah. And obviously I'm saying that facetiously, but it's my opinion that you're right. There are some people who say we don't know the long-term effects. We live our life with melatonin. If it was bad for us, in fact, it's the loss of melatonin in advanced age that seems to be the problem, or a problem, not necessarily the problem. So, like I say, I'll give you another example. Melatonin is becoming very, very, very common supplement. In 2021, in the United States, the amount of money spent on melatonin, listen to this carefully, the amount of money spent on melatonin in 2021 was $1.1 billion. That was 180% increase since 2018. It's estimated that by 2025, that may even double. Many, 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 many people are taking melatonin. And if it was bad for us, I guess people would be dying like flies, as the expression goes. I don't know if you have that expression in Australia, but at any rate, I don't know of anyone who's ever died of melatonin. Many people have died of prescription drugs. Every year in the United States, 32,000 people die from the misuse of prescription drugs. Aspirin kills 10,000 people a year worldwide because of gastric ulcers and the associated hemorrhage. Nobody says a word about 10,000 people dying of aspirin. Everybody takes aspirin. It's not safe. I mean, I take aspirin, obviously, when I have to. Ibuprofen destroys your liver and kidneys. Nobody mentions things like that, but when it comes to melatonin, for some reason, there are individuals who think, oh, that's absolutely taboo, absolutely taboo. I don't see it. I really do not see it. You can't kill an animal. You can't overdose. You can't give enough melatonin to an animal to discourage him, even. You give him a massive dose of melatonin, he looks at you and says, is that your best shot? Again, I don't want you saying that melatonin is safe under every circumstance, that everybody should take it, but it is seemingly a good, wholesome molecule, and you eat every day. If you eat any food at all, you're eating some melatonin. Yeah. I don't think it's going to kill us. I really don't. And the long-term effects, like I say, I know people who are diabetics. Diabetics have atherosclerosis. That's a very high free radical related disease. And melatonin is a super antioxidant that take a gram, 1,000 milligrams every day, and they have for many, many years to reduce atherosclerosis, blindness, loss of toes, nerve degeneration, all consequences of diabetes. That's a disease severe. And if you can delay, defer, prevent any of the effects with, even if you take insulin, your hyperglycemia still fluctuating and so forth. It's just a terrible, terrible disease. So, safer than water. People drown of water.
Yeah.
A lot of people drown every year of water. What are we going to get rid of water? Yeah, it just, again, I believe in prescription medications. In some cases, they're absolutely important. But I will give you one example. If you have cancer, one of the common drugs is called doxorubicin. Doxorubicin is a good anti-cancer agent. The problem is it's selectively taken up by mitochondria, and your heart has a lot of mitochondria. And after you're on doxorubicin therapy, you may cure your cancer, but your heart is totally destroyed, and the heart does not degenerate, and you die of heart failure. Well, you lived 5 years longer, but you die of heart failure. You die because of the doxorubicin toxicity to your heart. Quality of life is everything. There are drugs in the United States that prescription drugs to delay aging. And when you check the details, they are delaying aging by 3 months. I mean, death by 3 months. Well, when you're 75 years old, 3 months is not. But they push them very hard. The desire to live longer, take this drug. They don't talk about the quality of life, but you live longer, and they don't tell you much. They make it sound like you live 20 years longer and you're vital and so forth. Not the case. these drugs are very, very toxic. Melatonin is good, not perfect. Melatonin is good. And I certainly am going to live the rest of my life with melatonin. And virtually everybody, my neighbors, my friends, my fellow scientists, almost all of them take melatonin.
So for people who are trying to, avoid these age-related conditions, metabolic dysfunction, the damage to the heart, neurodegeneration, what would be the safest and most effective, dose to go with, that's not going to, really cause any trouble, but also going to
Right.
help out?
Good question. I would suggest that if people, you had mentioned earlier that something to the effect that maybe a recommendation would be around 50, around 45 to 50. If you begin to take melatonin, I would suggest a low dose. In other words, 3 to 5 milligrams. But as you age, and especially if you are genetically prone to certain diseases, you should certainly increase that amount. The 3 to 5 milligrams is sufficient to set your circadian rhythms, but much of the damage that you experience with age is related to free radicals. For example, everybody knows vitamin C, you prevent oxidative damage. The usual dose of vitamin C is Linus Pauling, who won the Nobel Prize, recommended 4 grams daily. And if you expect 2-3 milligrams of melatonin to compete with 4 grams, even though it's a very, very, very good antioxidant, it's pretty tough to reconcile. So I would say, begin at 45, 50, if you're going to do it. That's your choice. Small dose, every couple of years up that dose, and maybe by the time you're 65, 70. I think what we're going to see is, again, that value change. I think it's going to increase with time, and especially under certain disease. You probably know even the data on COVID. Do you know melatonin about COVID?
I've seen a few publications that you've been involved in.
There are already 7 clinical trials showing that melatonin lessens the severity of disease. Again, you always hear about the immunizations. Well, immunizations, right now, our vice president has COVID. She's been immunized. She's had 2 or 3 boosters, and she still gets COVID. A lot of people who got immunized still get COVID. Well, at any rate, with regards to time, I don't think 20, 30, 40 milligrams by the time you're my age would be unusual.
And do you recommend any particular brand? I know there's some issue with, regulation and not having, yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know what's available in one of the best brands we can determine in the United States, because we toyed with some when we measured them, is something called Source Naturals. You can buy it online. And it's, again, in reference to that, seemed to be a very good source. It's sublingual, 5 milligram tablets. And where we buy it, at a place called Costco, you can buy 245 milligram capsules for $12. Think about that, how cheap it is. I'll put it in the context of also COVID. COVID, one of the big drugs, if you get COVID, is remdesivir. Remdesivir treatment for a week costs $3,000. Melatonin treatment for a week, $10. And it may be just as effective, if not more so. It's a matter. Also, in the United States, we can buy pure melatonin from a company in Henderson, Nevada called Pure Bulk. A lot of people just buy melatonin, pure melatonin, Pure Bulk, and you can buy it in large quantities. I mean, if you want to. I don't know if they sell kilograms, but they, to use a kilogram melatonin would take you a long, long time.
Yeah.
At 20 milligrams of whack, but yeah, I'm sure there are some shyster companies out there, because melatonin is selling so well, that are producing melatonin wannabes, or with half the melatonin that they advertise.
Yeah.
We have a system in the United States called USP, U.S. Pharmacopoeia, which evaluates some supplements, and if they have a USP sanction, that means they've been tested and are good. And I think Source Naturals, there's a couple others I can't remember right now.
I've heard you mention Natrol.
Natrol, I'm sorry. Yeah, Natrol also. Yeah. Natrol is another one. That's another one of the USP sanctioned. And there's Nature's Bounty or something. But there are a dozen that are available that are USP sanctioned in the United States. But there are a lot of melatonin products. Gosh. And again, I think it's, people trying to capitalize on its popularity. And it's going to double by 2025. Which means it'll be more than $2 billion worth of melatonin. Melatonin sells more than vitamin C now in the United States. Vitamin C is are supplements very common in Australia?
Yes, yeah.
They are? So vitamin C, that would not be an unusual molecule for people to take.
Not at all, very popular.
I see, yeah. Well, like I say, it also in the United States, but melatonin outsells vitamin C now, which it's overtaken it in the last 5-6 years. Vitamin E is very common here. Vitamin C, zinc because of COVID, but and again, I'm not a big supporter necessarily of supplements, but of course, melatonin, I see it's an exception, obviously. But
all right.
Again, vitamin C isn't going to hurt you. Vitamin D, if you give very high doses of vitamin C, you get a little skin lesion and so forth. But vitamin C, vitamin E, I think they're not going to do you enough. Vitamin D3, we don't get enough sun. We're not getting enough UV. We're not getting enough vitamin D synthesis. I'm sure most people in Australia, like most people in the United States, their circulating vitamin D levels are too low, I'm sure.
Not mine, thankfully.
Pardon me?
Not mine, thankfully.
Oh, great. Well, and that means osteoporosis. Again, there's a lot of things go wrong when you don't get enough sunlight, and we avoid sunlight with a passion. I mean, humans generally avoid, except for those who want to lay in the sun, but beyond that, So that's the situation, Cameron.
Well, look, I've got two or three more pages of questions, but I know you're a very busy man, so I'm going to have to let you go. We'll have to do this again sometime, because I have...
Cameron, it's been a pleasure. It's been enjoyable, because sometimes I be interviewed by individuals who have no idea what they're talking about, and I have to explain where, how, why, when. But you are familiar with the literature, which makes it a lot easier to have a rational discussion. I appreciate it, and you be well.
Thank you so much, Russ. This has been
best wishes
to
you.
Honor. All the best. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you bet. Be well.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I had a really great time speaking with Russ, so I really hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. If you'd like to learn more about the work Russell is involved in, I've put a link in the episode notes that takes you straight to his publication portal, where you can access all of the research he's been a part of. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can subscribe on Spotify and YouTube and leave up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. This is a simple, no-cost way of supporting my work and helping me reach more listeners and also get more guests onto the show. Please feel free to leave any comments on my YouTube channel as well, as I do try and read through as many as I can. I've also put links to all of my social media platforms in the episode notes if you'd like to keep up to date with the podcast, information about health, or if you'd just like to reach out to me in general. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Take care.